The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have something very special for you, mixed media portraits with Jean Pederson. We're going to have a lot of fun with this one. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Jean Pederson, and today we're going to talk about mixed media as it pertains to a profile portrait. We're going to use mixed media to help interpret your subject instead of staying with a traditional realistic approach. You will be encouraged to use your own personal language to interpret the subject and come up with something that's really exciting and unique and authentic for you and your audience. Many of the ideas and techniques that we will be discussing today can transition into other subjects and styles. Take parts of this video that resonate with you and apply it to your own personal language, your own process. I would like to challenge you and your clients to shed traditional expectations of what a portrait should be and challenge you to think about figure and ground. Where does one start and one stop? How much information do you have to give your audience to communicate the idea of a portrait? And think about economy of brushstroke, think about textures, think about all kinds of transitions from your ground to your subject. So we're going to talk about those kinds of things within this video today. Now I'd like to talk about all of my supplies, the supplies that will help you to make a wonderful profile portrait. I have with me a number of different colors of acrylic inks. Acrylic inks are really runny. They're highly pigmented. I have a warm and a cool red, yellow, and blue, as well as a really hot opera color. Then I also have some heavy-bodied acrylics, which are thicker, a little bit more like toothpaste, this stuff. And I have warm and cool red, yellow, and blue of these. Oh, all of these are also transparent, all of my inks, the transparent pigments. And my paints are, my red, yellow, and blue paints are transparent. I do have some opaques thrown in there just for fun, like composed blue and shell pink, for example. But most of my painting process is used as much as possible with transparents. I do have also some gesso. I like working with gesso because it has a grit to it. It's an absorbent ground, and I like to tint it. So I have gesso in a bag that is a smooth grit. You can get really lumpy or lumpy grit if you want to have more of a tooth on your surface, which is really lovely for some applications. I have pre-mixed some of the gessos in a light and a medium neutral color. I have a matte medium, and I have some gel medium, and that will be for different types of collage work that I'm going to do. You will be required to have some collage paper, whether it's pre-bought, made, or something that you've painted. So I've got bags of collage paper that I will be bringing out to collage onto my surface. I have a number of tools. I have a squeegee, a palette knife, a bunch of brushes. Most of my brushes are flat. I do have round brushes. They range from a size 1 to a size 12, and my flat brushes are a 1/4 inch to 1.5 inches. I have a set of scissors as well, a pair of scissors, pencils, pencil crayons or colored pencil. I have a slide ruler, and a slide ruler is really handy if you're doing any kind of portrait work and you're drawing and you want to make sure that things are parallel. Sometimes you can just eyeball it, but if things are off, I find that that's kind of handy. And I have a viewfinder, and viewfinders are very handy too if you want to see what kind of format or if you want to zoom in or out to your subject. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It would also be handy for you to have a sketchbook, some paper, and a little piece of sandpaper, paper towels, and a bucket of water. The last thing I have are Copic felt pens. They're not necessary, but they really make doing your sketches and your thumbnails really, really quick. So those are my materials. Oh, I forgot one thing. I do have a flow improver, and the flow improver does help you to extend any heavy-bodied paints that you have so that you can soften edges and so on. And I have one tube of acrylic paint that was all pre-mixed as a neutral. So this particular company will take all their small batches that they can't fill tubes with, and they'll mix it all up at the end of the year to come up with a neutral. And it's just kind of a handy way to start if you don't want to pre-mix your own stuff and waste, I shouldn't say waste. You've already got this, and so you can use your colors for other things besides a neutral. So those are my materials, and so now we're going to get started on developing our painting. Now we're going to start preparing our surface. Before we actually do our good surface, I'd like you to practice on a piece of paper. I have a piece of 140-pound Arches paper. You can use any kind of, thicker paper that you want. You'll notice that if you use a hot pressed paper as opposed to a cold press, you'll get a far different result. But the point of this is just to practice overlapping transparent colors so that when we get to our nice board, which I'll be using ampersand, you'll be much more successful with the application of the paint. I'm going to start with acrylic ink that's a Hansa yellow, and I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of it on my paper, and I'm going to take my squeegee, and I'm just going to make some really fun marks with my squeegee. You notice how I have some paper towel on each side, and that's simply so that I can catch some of the waste and it doesn't damage my lovely table underneath. Okay, now I'm going to take some, let's do the opera. Now opera is a little bit fugitive, but it's a very fun color to use. So I'm going to put out some of this hot pink. Look at those colors that you can get from this. Just amazing. Makes me want to sing. It's just so much fun. You can do a whole series of acrylic abstracts with this method, and then go back in with some opaques and get some beautiful, beautiful results. This is primary cyan. Again, it's another ink that's very transparent. The squeegee is just really fast. Look at those gorgeous colors that are coming from the overlap of all this. Now in between, what I can do is take some rubbing alcohol or this flow improver, and I can splatter on this. And then when I pull my squeegee across, it will start to give me some different kinds of marks and spots, which will make my surface a little bit more interesting. Let's try a little bit of magenta, quinacridone magenta. Squeegee again. Sometimes you need to clean it off in between these. But you can see that as I add more layers, my surface is getting richer, more beautiful, rich colors from all the layering. I'll do a little bit more of a splatter with my flow improver. Let it sit for a few minutes. Not a few minutes, it just doesn't take long. All it does is it stops the drying process a little bit, breaks down that bond within the acrylic, and I start to get some really cool textures. So what I would recommend you do is practice a few times on a few different kinds of paper, both rough and smooth papers, and see what you come up with for a beautiful ground. So let's go try and do a few of these surfaces right now with overlapping transparent inks. All right, I'm ready to start putting some ink down on my hardboard surface, my ampersand. It's pre-paired, nice smooth surface. And I'm going to start with the same applications that I used before when we were working on paper. So I'm going to start with my Hansa yellow ink. I've got my squeegee ready. Okay, here we go. You can't go wrong with doing this. I mean, you just can't. You just play around with it. Have this stuff go off of your board randomly, and just have some fun putting all this paint down. Try to leave some areas that are white, because if you cover it all up with yellow, then it will always be influencing the colors, the subsequent colors that will come. If I leave some white, then the next color that I put down will be able to be, glowing in its pure form. So for example, if I put this opera over here, and then I stick it across the yellow, wherever it's going to be going across the yellow, it's going to turn a little bit orange. But in the white area, it's going to be able to stay with its own color. And as it transfers through, you'll see how it becomes affected by the yellow underneath it. Remember I talked about how your surface will give you different results. So if we look at the piece of paper that I just did that was on a rougher paper, more absorbent, I'm going to be getting a totally different effect than with this smooth board that I'm using. This will just take a little bit longer to work up my values, but I'm still going to end up with a really beautiful surface. Let's take the flow improver, or you can use rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol is much cheaper for this. And then I'm going to take my primary cyan, and I'm going to drizzle it on in a few places. Well, that's probably enough because I put so much on. And I'm just going to take it across. It's not a bad idea in between these layers, if it's really runny like this, to let it dry. I'm just going to keep going though, because, we can. Let's take a little bit of quinacridone gold. The trick to this is not to put each layer totally all over the surface. You want it to be random. And you want to have these little influencers, kind of like a social influencer, social media. It's just influencing in small areas, not over top of the whole thing. We'll get a little magenta down now. Quin magenta. So with each layer that I put on, the paint is going to become darker and more intense. A little bit more of the blue. Look how beautiful that is. Okay, I'm going to get my flow improver out again. See if I can get a little bit of texture happening in here. Or rubbing alcohol, remember you can use either one. Let that sit for a few minutes. Okay, so I will continue this process. I will continue to layer, layer, layer. You can see that I'm building up these colors and these values very, very slowly. I would like you to try now. Get out your transparent colors and start layering them on your board, and I'll meet you back here in a few minutes with a board that's finished. Okay, let's go for it. Okay, we're back. How's everybody doing? Did you get some really good surfaces created? Now I'd like to talk about your subject. So choose a subject that is meaningful to you. I've chosen a subject, a person that I know, and I had a model session with her where I could draw and photograph. It's helpful for me when I'm communicating with you to have a photograph of my subject here because I couldn't fly her all the way to the studio. So I do have a photograph of her. It's a portrait. I tried to make sure that the lighting was good because I want to have a source, a direction of light to show my light, my middle, and my dark values. If I can't see those transition of values, it's going to be very difficult for me to convey that to the viewer. So that's what I've got with my subject. As we're drawing the subject, you might want to think about dividing your photograph into a grid if you haven't drawn very much. That's very helpful because then you can estimate what angles and how much of the actual square is going to be taken up by a forehead or the hair. It's a handy way to draw if you don't draw a lot. Another thing that would be very helpful to you to take a look at is the actual anatomy of the human skull. Things like the eye, for example. So I drew these from a skull that I got at a medical center. You know, it's just a plastic skull. And so I drew the skull as I saw it, looking at the light, middle, and dark areas. So you can see where there's ridges. You can see the structure of the skull. And there's actually a huge socket where the eye fits, and part of that is the zygomatic process and the area where the eyeball fits in. Then I stuck the eyeball in there over on this side, and the eyeball is a very small part of the actual orbit that is holding the eye. Now if we start to put some flesh over top, you'll see that the actual eyeball, which is here, is mostly covered up by eyelid and flesh. We just see a little bit of the iris and a little bit of the white of the eye, so that in a realistic eye that we're drawing, this is what we're going to come up with. All of this stuff is really important because the shape of the brow bone, the shape of how the eyelid comes out, projects out from the eyeball itself, creates light, middle, and dark values. So that's why investing a little bit of time in something like this will really help you to understand the contours, where things go in and where things go out within the face or the body if you're going to do figure work, so that you kind of understand if the light's coming from a direction, it's going to hit where there's a high spot, it'll cast a shadow down where there's a valley. So those kinds of things are really, really handy. All right, so the next thing that I find really helpful is to practice. Practice drawing. So what I've done is I've practiced drawing my model several times. And I did use a grid because I knew that I would be coming here and talking to you today, and I wanted to make sure that I made things as easy as possible for you, the viewer, so that you can be successful with your portrait. So I've used the same square format for each of my drawings. That's really important. If you're going to be painting on a square format, make sure that you have your sketch in a square format as well. And then I simply divided it into thirds. You can divide it into quarters or tenths, it doesn't really matter. It's just thirds doesn't take very long, so that's why I use thirds to divide. And I would just eyeball it literally to see where a part of the head would come across in a square to create a triangle. So you can see that. I would have a look at where the forehead comes down, and I would try to recreate that. And there's a few other little things that can be helpful. Sometimes when you're drawing, if you create a line where the nose and the lips and the chin all connect, and you can see that that's mostly happening here with my model, and draw that same line with the nose. That is a little bit of a marker to help you out. It might help you also as a marker for where the earlobe goes. Sometimes an ear might be her head might be at a little bit of an angle. But these kinds of marks tend to help me to get a drawing that I like. So I've drawn her a few times, and some of them are a little bit closer to how she looks, and some of them aren't quite on the mark. But that doesn't really matter for this particular portrait. What we want to do is come up with a drawing that feels comfortable. This girl did not pay me to do her portrait, so she's my inspiration. She is going to be my catalyst for painting a portrait, and I can change it and shift it so that I come up with an image that I really appreciate. So then what I did was I drew it again freehand, and I put in my shades, my light, middle, and dark shades with a pencil. So you can see that here I've put in this square, which is a painting in behind her, and that's kind of nice. If you can take a look at what's in around your model and put them into a place, give a suggestion of a door, of a window, of drapery, something like that, it kind of helps to plant the figure and give her a location for the audience that's looking at the painting to understand the context of where she is. So I did a pencil sketch using lights, middles, and darks, and then I did the same thing with some paint. So I used light, middle, and dark paint to create a value sketch that will help me moving forward. Now, if you don't want to use a pencil or paint, you can use Copic felt pens, and they can be extremely helpful with creating a quick value sketch. So for example, if I'm doing a thumbnail is just a really small sketch. I can kind of eyeball where my thirds are, and then I can just start quickly drawing out where all of these different things are. I'm just going to do this really quickly. Okay, so there's my face, and there's the back of the head. There's my chin, and then I've got the drapery that she's wearing up here. And I have to decide, where do I want my lights, middles, and darks to be? So this is so fast. I find these transparent markers really, really easy for preparing. And then I'll put the dark in. I just need 3 values. You can use 4 or 5 or 6, but for this particular episode, this particular video, I will be just using 3 values to start with. So that's a really, really quick value sketch thumbnail to see where my values are. From here, I could go to a pencil sketch or a sketch using paint, or I could just work off of this and my model or my photograph, depending on what resources you have to get you going. Now I encourage you to take some time and practice drawing your model in a few different scales. Once you feel confident drawing your model, I'd like you to grid your surface and draw your model onto your surface. Now we're going to establish value patterns within our painting. So what I've done is I've drawn out my sketch, which I showed you. I had a pencil sketch and I had a value sketch, and I also showed you how to grid your painting, your drawing. I have a photograph of a grid. I drew the grid on here, and then I drew out my model on top of my grid, and I paid attention to where these shapes are, where my light, middle, and dark shapes are, and I drew those in on top of my surface. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about how you can make a transparent dark and a neutral light. So this is why I use a lot of transparent colors. I started off with watercolor, and in watercolor I learned that if I'm going to layer a lot, I need to use transparent paints, pigments, in order to get nice clean layering and blending without making yucky colors. So here I've got my warm and cool red, yellow, blue that I'm going to put out. I've got quinacridone gold that I'll stick onto my palette paper. Hansa yellow is my cool yellow. Pyrrole red is my warm red. And Quin magenta is my cool red. All of these are transparent. And I have phthalo blue red shade. So it's a blue on the red shade, so it makes nice purples. And then I have phthalo turquoise, which is on the yellow side, and it makes nice greens. So if I want to make a nice transparent dark, all I need is a red, a yellow, and a blue, and I mix them all together. And depending on how much of each pigment there is will give me either a warm or a cool dark, or more on the red side or the green or the golden side. So I do have a transparent dark mixed here. This is a little bit on the green side or an indigo side, but I will show you how to mix one, and I will show you how you can alter this so that it won't be quite as blue-green. So I've got a little bit of phthalo here, phthalo blue. I'm going to add my quinacridone magenta. And the phthalo is a very, very strong color. And some quin gold. So I mix all those together, and I'm going to test it on this piece of paper. And if I smudge it a bit, you can see it's very, very similar to what I've got here, perhaps a little bit more yellow in it. So if I put a little bit of red in there, a little bit more magenta, you can see the difference between the two just by adding a little bit of red to it. So you have to decide what kind of a transparent dark would be most appealing to you. But I think that's pretty good. Keep one of these pieces of paper handy, because it's really handy to be able to test your colors and see what's happening with them. So I know what my transparent darks are like. So now I go back to what I have here with my original sketches, where my lights, middles, and darks are. And I have my photograph. So now I should be able to start punching in some of my darks. Hi, I'm Jean Pederson, and today we're going to talk about mixed media as it pertains to a profile portrait. We're going to use mixed media to help interpret your subject instead of staying with a traditional, realistic approach. Painting the figure is something very dear to my heart. Finding out who somebody is and what makes them tick. It's more than just painting an eye, a nose, a mouth. It's really thinking about the person and the soul of that person and how I can convey something of that person outside of the physicality when I'm doing the painting. Many of the ideas and techniques that we will be discussing can transition into other subjects and styles. We're going to talk about layering transparent inks and trying to make all kinds of really cool textures, how to choose your subject and how to draw it onto your board. We're going to establish value patterns within our painting and talk about collage. I would like to challenge you and your clients to shed traditional expectations of what a portrait should be and perhaps ask yourself, what if I try this paper or this particular material and this paint and this scraping tool? What would happen if I layer these two different paints together? I hope that you can apply some of these ideas to your painting process to become the most authentic and strong artist that you can become.
Well, that was Jean Pederson and mixed media portraits. So much fun, makes us so creative. You can learn more about that video at lilyartvideo.com. And remember, there's a special discount code in the comments section. What do you say we go right to our interview with Jean?
I started painting when I was a little child. I always loved painting and creating. But those kinds of things aren't really encouraged when you have folks that were growing up in the Depression era. So, I did other things in university and college, but I always took art classes as my options. And so that was a really lovely way to keep my hand in my creative side. I would describe my style of painting as evolving. I always want to be challenging myself and pushing my abilities as far as I can to become the best artist I can, and I'm not really satisfied with staying in one spot. I love watercolor, acrylic, oil, mixed media. Mixed media, though, does give me an opportunity to really experiment and try a lot of new things. But I think each of the mediums has an appropriate place for certain subjects and styles. I use mixed media because it has so much versatility. You're able to layer transparent, opaque, thick, thin in a much more quick, fluid, easy manner than you could with oil or watercolor. Most watercolors are transparent, and if you go into the opaques, they tend to get chalky and thick. So mixed media and acrylic and collage give you an opportunity to layer and create really rich surfaces. The most difficult thing about mixed media is choosing the kinds of media that you want to work with in one sitting. There's so many options out there, and you really have to, I think, limit what you're doing in one painting or it'll become too chaotic. So you have to really be focused on certain applications for each painting. The thing that I love most about mixed media is the opportunities available to you at each turn when you're painting. If you decide you want to you've gone too dark, you can apply some white to it and start your glazing process all over again, or add some collage bits in, found materials, pieces of paper. The opportunities that you have are just endless. I am constantly asking myself, what if? What if I try this? What would be the outcome if I do that? Understanding my paints, my materials, and the techniques. What would happen if I did the opposite of what is a traditional way, a traditional practice? I also think that bringing in new materials is very exciting because you don't know what they're going to do. And it makes you depend on your raw drawing and painting abilities. For example, oil stick would be a really fun and exciting way to work because it's not something that I have spent as much time with as acrylic watercolor and traditional oil on a palette. I don't know if there's an ideal subject. I think there are people that have an interesting story. And I think if you get to know people and try to convey who they are in an honest manner, then that's an ideal subject. I decide what direction to take a painting in through constant evaluation throughout my painting process. I might have an idea of where I want to go at the beginning, but that's just a start, and I don't want to be tied to one direction. If I think of an opportunity that might be stronger, might convey my ideas, my message, my concept in a better way, or be more exciting visually, I want to leave the door open for that kind of thing. So I'm constantly evaluating what's going on the surface of my painting so that I open myself up to opportunity. Motivation is sometimes a difficult thing for a lot of artists. I actually teach a thing called 4x4, which is a year-long program that people sign up for. I see them 4 days in a row, 4 times a year. And part of the reason I did this was because I wanted to make sure that people had a commitment to growing as artists, and having a commitment and a purpose really does help you to stay motivated. We all get into those slumps, and I think the worst thing you can do is nothing. You have to get up and get going and put your pencil or your brush to paper, canvas, whatever it is your medium is, and do something every day. Even if you don't like it, do it. Because through doing will come inspiration, and you'll be back at it again in no time. So just keep plugging away if you get into those situations, and the joy of creating will come back to you. I have a number of workshops coming up in the future. I'm planning on teaching in the Galapagos, for example, all over North America, and hoping to do a few workshops in Europe as well. I have a couple of wonderful, exciting Creative Catalyst videos that will be shown in the next few years, and I'm really excited, and hopefully they'll invite me back to come and do some more of these. And I also have a number of gallery shows that will be coming up both in commercial and public gallery spaces, so stay tuned for that. I look forward to it. It's pretty exciting. Hope to see you there.
Well, that was Jean Pederson from Mixed Media Portraits, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special discount in the comments section. Thank you for watching today.
Hi, I'm Jean Pederson, and today we're going to talk about mixed media as it pertains to a profile portrait. We're going to use mixed media to help interpret your subject instead of staying with a traditional, realistic approach. Painting the figure is something very dear to my heart. Finding out who somebody is and what makes them tick. It's more than just painting an eye, a nose, a mouth. It's really thinking about the person and the soul of that person, and how I can convey something of that person outside of the physicality when I'm doing the painting. Many of the ideas and techniques that we will be discussing can transition into other subjects and styles. We're going to talk about layering transparent inks and trying to make all kinds of really cool textures, how to choose your subject and how to draw it onto your board. We're going to establish value patterns within our painting and talk about collage. I would like to challenge you and your clients to shed traditional expectations of what a portrait should be, and perhaps ask yourself, what if I try this paper or this particular material and this paint and this scraping tool? What would happen if I layer these two different paints together? I hope that you can apply some of these ideas to your painting process to become the most authentic and strong artist that you can become.